This Handley Page Hampden was on a dangerous mission to Belgium. What first seemed as a success turned into disaster. The crew found themselves in flames with a cabin filled with smoke, and the crew bailing out over the English Channel. But one man refused to leave, 18-year-old John Hannah. What happens next is a story of the utmost bravery and grit, which turned disaster into legend. In September 1940, the Allied forces were deep into World War II and had endured weeks of aerial bombardment from the Luftwaffe. The persistent aerial attacks had started over the English Channel in July of that year, and this particularly lengthy offensive is now what we refer to as the Battle of Britain. After an attack on Berlin in late August, Hitler demanded his forces double down and intensify their attacks on London in an attempt to bring the country to its knees, ready for an invasion. The Luftwaffe changed its strategy and carried out its first daylight attack on London on the 7th of September, causing widespread civilian casualties and destruction. This change of approach caught the Royal Air Force off guard, but the weather in the following days turned, preventing further large-scale attacks from either side. The morning of Sunday the 15th of September 1940 dawned with fair weather conditions, but this soon gave way to clouds that rolled in, and with it, wave after wave of Luftwaffe aircraft headed straight for the capital. On that same day at RAF Scampton, 83 Squadron was gearing up for a bombing raid on German invasion barges suspected to be used for an invasion of the United Kingdom. They had their routes planned, and they were heading to Antwerp in Belgium. The Handley Page Hampden carried a crew of 4, a pilot, navigator, radio operator, and rear gunner. Designed as a fast, maneuverable fighting bomber, it featured a fixed forward-firing Browning machine gun in the nose and a manually operated Vickers gun in the nose and rear positions. However, during the Norwegian campaign, these guns proved inadequate for daylight defense, leading to the replacement of single mounts with twin Vickers guns. It had a top speed of 265 miles per hour, and when it was introduced, it had greater speeds and climb rates than its contemporaries. Pilots praised the Hampden's maneuverability and responsiveness, enjoying excellent visibility and strong performance for the time, though its controls required familiarization. Despite its impressive handling and speed, the aircraft's narrow fuselage was extremely cramped, just wide enough for one person, and crew movement was nearly impossible during missions, making flights uncomfortable. Because of these tight conditions and its thin rectangular fuselage shape, crews nicknamed the Hampden the Flying Suitcase, as well as the Panhandle and Flying Tadpole. Pilot Wilfred John Lewis recalled it as a beautiful airplane to fly, terrible to fly in, noting the discomfort, lack of heating, and the pilot's demanding workload. On this day, the crew crammed themselves into the aircraft and started the engines. Up the front was Canadian pilot Flying Officer Claire Connor. Behind was the navigator, Sergeant Douglas Hayhurst, who had the maps prepped, and the rear gunner, leading aircraftsman George James, with Sergeant John Hannah as the wireless operator and gunner. Sergeant John Hannah is important to this story, and he was born on the 27th of November 1921 in Paisley near Glasgow. And, like a lot of his peers, he signed up for the Royal Air Force at the outbreak of World War II. He initially trained as a wireless operator and was promoted to sergeant in 1940. He found himself posted to 83 Squadron as a wireless operator and gunner, and was based at RAF Scampton in Lincolnshire along with No. 5 Group. Once the 15 aircraft were ready, they took off for their mission over Belgium. It was only a short journey from England to Belgium, but it would be a tense one, with Germany preparing for an invasion of the UK under what we now know as Operation Sea Lion. The risk of intercept by German fighters was high. Also playing on the minds of the crew was the altitude for the bombing run. Hoping to be covered by darkness, they planned to carry out their bombing run at 2,000 feet. As they approached the Belgium coast, they made their final checks, ensuring the bomb bay was prepped and the targets in sight. On their first run, the approach was slightly off, so they had to go around again. At 2,000 feet, they came in for their second run. At this point, the enemy were aware of their position and started firing from the ground. They lined up on the target and dropped the bombs on the barge concentration in Antwerp. It was a successful drop, and the landing barges were struck. After the successful bombing run, they turned to head back home. They were surrounded by intense anti-aircraft fire. The pilot, flying officer Connor, kept the aircraft on track, monitored by the navigator, but soon their luck ran out, and they received a direct hit from an anti-aircraft munition, which burst in the bomb compartment. Shrapnel from the explosion pierced both the port and starboard fuel tanks. Very quickly, the wireless operators and rear gunners' compartments were engulfed in flames, and the crew found themselves in a perilous position. As the crew composed themselves, John Hannah pushed through the flames to get to the fire extinguishers at the back. He checked on the rear gunner, but saw that he had already bailed out of the aircraft. The intense heat had melted the floor and metal around the area. At this moment, John had the opportunity to escape through the bottom escape hatch and follow the rear gunner out of the aircraft. Rather than follow his crewmate, Hannah started to tackle the blaze using the 2 fire extinguishers on board. The fierce heat then caused thousands of rounds of ammunition to start exploding around the remaining crew. This created further holes in the fuselage and allowed more oxygen to feed the flames. The lights from the fire and exploded ammunition was blinding, and the fumes had filled the entire cabin. Without a thought for himself, Hannah continued to fight the fire. He was using the fire extinguishers, but eventually they ran out. The fire was still raging, and Hannah resorted to using his logbook to try and extinguish the fire. With his logbook on fire, he then started to use his hands to put the remaining fire out. Almost blinded by the intense heat, and almost overcome with fumes, Hannah switched on his oxygen supply so he could continue to fight the blaze. The oxygen mask wasn't enough to combat the fumes, so he had to temporarily head up to the gunner position and take a breath of fresh air before heading back to fight the blaze. He did this 3 times whilst trying to remain conscious. The intense heat had caused the aluminium sheet metal on the floor to melt away, leaving only the crossbearers. Amazingly, after all his efforts, Hannah managed to put the blaze out. But in the process, he had sustained burns to his hands, face and eyes. After tackling the flames, he managed to crawl through the aircraft to the cockpit. The pilot, Claire Connor, was still at the controls, limping the aircraft back to England. But John noticed that the navigator had also bailed out during the fire. John and Claire realized that they were the only crew remaining on board. John then searched around and found the navigator's log and maps, and passed them forward to Claire Connor, who could use them to navigate home. Although the flames were out, the aircraft was full of holes, and the full extent of the damage wasn't known. By some miracle, they managed to navigate the almost wrecked aircraft back to Lincolnshire and landed at RAF Scampton. John Hannah was immediately taken to hospital for treatment for the severe burns he had endured. It was on the 1st of October, whilst he was recuperating in hospital, that he found out that he had been awarded the Victoria Cross, the highest decoration for gallantry for his incredible bravery. His crewmate, Flying Officer Claire Connor, recommended him for the award, and at the same time was awarded the Distinguished Flying Cross. Both of them were decorated by King George VI at Buckingham Palace. The announcement and accompanying citation for the Victoria Cross was published in the supplement to the London Gazette on the 1st of October 1940, and stated that this airman displayed courage, coolness, and devotion to duty of the highest order, and by his action in remaining and successfully extinguishing the fire under conditions of the greatest danger and difficulty, enabled the pilots to bring the aircraft to its base. Sergeant John Hannah was aircrew of what is known as Bomber Command, which controlled the Royal Air Force's bomber forces from 1936 to 1968, and played a central role in the strategic bombing of Germany in World War II. Bomber Command suffered an unusually high casualty rate, with over 44% of airmen never returning from their missions. While John Hannah made good progress in recovering from his extensive burns and returned to the Royal Air Force, it is believed that the burns weakened his immune system and he contracted tuberculosis in 1941. His illness made it necessary for him to be discharged from the Royal Air Force in December 1942, and he returned to civilian life with a full disability pension. Sadly, he succumbed to his illness in 1947, leaving a wife and 3 young daughters. He was 25 years old. A portrait of him by artist Eric Henry Kennington exists and is part of the art collection owned by the Imperial War Museum. John Hannah was only 18 years old when he received the Victoria Cross and was the youngest person to receive it in World War II. His actions undoubtedly saved the life of Claire Connor, but not forgetting that Claire's actions also saved the life of John Hannah. It was a truly heroic moment, and he is a credit to Scotland, the UK, and human perseverance and sacrifice. A slightly different story today, but one I feel is important to show and discover. It shows the mental resilience and bravery of aviators, and also the resilience of the airframes too. I hope you found it interesting. Please like the video if you did, and comment to help with that sneaky algorithm. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.